Follow the basic principles. I have an ongoing speedrun that I started at 600 and I've been working my way up. I'm currently 1300 and I play rapid games while explaining to you move by move why I'm playing the moves that I'm playing, how I'm following the basic principles, and how I capitalize on my opponent when they are not following the basic principles. This game is a brutal reminder as to why you should follow the basic principles, especially if you are a beginner to intermediate rated player, because my opponent got crushed in just 14 moves. So I started with the move d4 because I'm a d4 lover at heart. And within the first two moves, you can already see my opponent is not really even trying to contest the center. Now, following the basic principles, you should always try to contest the center. If I'm going to play d4, follow it up with d5. The only time I see structures like this work is when I see advanced players going with their own setup, but developing their pieces in an efficient way to make up for the lack of space that they're taking in the center. For example, if we go on a few more moves, I'm over here taking up the entire center and developing my knights. And all my opponent has done is kind of created this square with their developments. When the bishop is on d7, all it's really doing is being an inconvenience because the bishop can't really do anything on this diagonal, and they're blocking a square for their queen to develop onto and a square for their knight to develop onto. Usually when I see pawns developed on d6 and e6, a lot of the times you'll want to fianchetto your bishops so that they can sit on a more open diagonal where they're doing a lot more than they're doing right here. This just looks like a cluster of pieces that are stuck. Meanwhile, I'm following the basic principles. I've controlled the center as much as I can, which is a lot because my opponent has allowed it, and I'm developing my minor pieces next. Knights out, bishops out, and castle. Then my opponent plays the move knight to a6, which, if you haven't heard the phrase, knights on the rim are grim. Because of how passive their center is, at this point, they need to contest the center in some way. Play a move like c5, then bring this knight out behind the pawn so you can pressure this pawn on d4. I continue with my developments, and then knight to b4. Now, the minute my opponent played this move, I automatically knew that I was going to move my bishop because I was not about to trade my good bishop for their bad knights. How do I know this is a bad knight compared to my bishop? Whenever I develop my bishop onto this diagonal, when it's on d3, in most structures, this b1 to h7 diagonal can become really powerful, especially if your opponent castles on the king side. So I know, in my mind, if my bishop can sit on this diagonal and I can open up this pawn by playing e5, this diagonal is going to be super strong. However, what has this knight really accomplished and where is it going? I have a vision for my bishop. However, with this knight, I moved to the corner of the board and now it's trying to kind of intimidate me. But if it ever has to move again, it can't go to any of these squares. It would have to go back to a6 or c6. So because I know that this trade is not good for me, I immediately move back. And I want to move back to a square where I can stay on its strongest diagonal. Now again, my opponent probably should have played c5, trying to contest something in the center, so if this knight has to move, it can go back to c6. However, they chose to play the move c6 instead of c5, which all it's really doing, blocking another square for their knight to move back to. So as I mentioned, I've developed my pawns, taken up the center of the board, developed my minor pieces, got my bishop out, so now it's time to get my king safe. So we castle. Here I know that I have a space advantage. My pieces are more in sync, I have more space, I'm the one that can start an attack, and I want to try to capitalize on this lost time and space that my opponent has given me to make sure that they don't have the time to contest the center again and try to improve their pieces, which means I need a plan of attack. So as I mentioned, I already have this idea in mind that if I can play the move e5, this bishop on this diagonal becomes really strong. What's a way to make this diagonal even stronger for me? A battery along the diagonal. Getting my queen to either c2 or d3 to line up on this diagonal for some potential checkmate threats. However, I can't do that now because of the knights. So first things first, kick the knight out. It has to go back to the corner of the board. And now I play the move queen to d3, setting up for my idea. Now you might think, oh well, isn't this a little bit of hope chess? You're hoping your opponent falls for this move e5, and then after takes you threaten the knights and you threaten checkmates. Well, yes, I'm hoping that they blunder e5 so I can remove the defender and either checkmate or win a piece. However, every move that I've played to get this idea started has been purposeful and improving my position at the same time. A lot of times with Hope Chess, I see players set up for a certain idea or go through 2, 3, 4 moves with their pieces, putting them on worse squares, or not syncing up their pieces anymore to go for a certain idea that's like a 1-move threat, or something that if their opponent defends, their position is just worse because they went out of their way to try to make something work. However, this is a good example of how you can have a little bit of hope that your opponent falls for something, but it's not really Hope Chess because I'm improving my position. Having a battery is super strong. Playing e5 is a strong idea, and when I play a3, I was kicking my opponent's knight back to a worse square. So all in all I've done is improved my position while trying to execute this one main idea. Now, my opponent ended up playing the move h6, which just opens up this winning idea for me. So I played the move e5, and now I'm trying to remove the defender from the square because here I have checkmates. After takes and takes, they're not able to defend both threats at the same time, so they have to play a move like g6 and just give up their piece. They decided to be a bit more generous and move their knight and just give me checkmates, so I ended up winning in just 14 moves. But even if they had played a move like g6 instead of h6, so I don't have this checkmate threat, just look at my position. Within 11 moves, just by following the basic principles and capitalizing on the fact that my opponent didn't follow the basic principles, I have a super strong center. All my pieces are developed and on super strong diagonals and squares towards the center of the board. My queen is developed, and my opponent does not have much space in their position at all. So this was just a short and sweet, well, sweet for me and brutal for my opponents, example of what happens when you just follow the basic principles, and when your opponent doesn't, some ways you can capitalize on it. The most important thing, though, is when you do have a space advantage and a developmental advantage, you want to try to use that advantage to create an attack or to keep restricting your opponent's position as much as you can. You don't want to give them time to kind of untangle themselves from the mess they got into. And that's kind of what I demonstrated in this game. So I hope this was instructive and helpful. Let me know if you would like more videos like this, and thank you for watching. Bye-bye.